Remember that recommendation to cut salt from your diet? Well, it turns out that low-salt diets could pose health risks. WSJ's health whiz, Ron Winslow, joins us, as does University of Alabama professor of medicine, Suzanne Oparil. Thank you both for being here. And let me start with you, Ron. This is based on a new study. What did it find?
Well, it found that in a large huge global population, 100,000 patients or people who were subjects of the study, that those whose sodium consumption was estimated at lower than 3,000 milligrams per day actually had a slightly higher risk of death and bad outcomes from heart disease. And the current guidelines are actually for sodium intake is actually below 3,000 milligrams. So it raises a possibility that people who would meet the guidelines could be at risk. It's
okay, and we've actually got a full a graphic here that shows us what the recommendations are. It says the American Heart Association 1,500 milligrams. They're all lower than what we are on average eating, right?
We are.
So I guess very few of us are actually in danger then, aren't we?
You could say that, certainly if this study is correct. But yes, we are. There's been a decades-long campaign by public health groups to get us to reduce our sodium, restrict our sodium intake. It's very hard to do in the food environment that we're in. Most salt comes not from your salt shaker, but from the food that you buy at the supermarket or that you eat at restaurants, and so it's difficult to meet these targets.
Okay, we also have an AHA comment here. It says, we hold fast to the recommendations that there is a need to reduce sodium intake in the diet. Professor Oparil, University of Alabama, you don't buy that, do you?
I don't. I believe that this observational study and a variety of other analyses appeared recently suggest that there's a U-shaped relationship between sodium intake and not only blood pressure but outcomes such as heart disease, chronic kidney disease, stroke, and heart failure. And,
Professor, explain what you mean by U-shaped. That means that too much or too little is a problem. Is that what you mean by that?
That was a perfect summary. I have nothing to add. What the sweet spot is in the middle, and this is between, according to the PURE study, which we're talking about, 3 to 6 grams of salt a day. And that's what most of the people in the world eat. The PURE study that surveyed, as Ron said, more than 100,000 people, free-living people in 17 different countries, found that only 4% of that whole population was consuming salt in the range of what's recommended by the American Heart and other agencies, government.
Now, it doesn't look like, we were talking with Ron here, it doesn't look like it's much of a problem because it seems on average nobody's following this advice. Right?
It's very hard to do. I can speak to that point. We've done studies where we compare ordinary or high salt intake to low salt intake in patients. And we find that it's very hard for people to adhere to the very low salt diet. They have to have the diet prepared specially by research dietitians and so on, and be given the food.
Okay, Ron, back to you. There's a lot of stuff that we eat that is unprocessed, but pretty salty, right? I mean, potato chips, I guess, are processed, but they're salty.
Sure. Yes. There's a lot. I mean, a lot of common foods. If you buy a frozen pot pie at the grocery store or a hot dog, a lot of chip snacks. Bread has a lot of sodium, so if you have even in a sandwich, you get sodium that you may not be aware that you're getting.
And the history of this was to preserve food, right? Salt sucks the water out of microbes, so they die, and you don't, and so they don't become infected. That's sort of the history of why we use salt. A lot of it, right?
That is one reason. And certainly salt is a critical nutrient in the body, or sodium is a critical nutrient for our body's cellular function, and we need a certain level to stay alive. So, but
yeah, you've got to breathe, right? It's part of breathing. And I know Japanese soldiers in Borneo didn't know how to get the salt out of the roots, and they basically drowned because they couldn't breathe.
True, but there has been a lot of, a big association with very high sodium consumption with heart risk. And so it's really, as Dr. Oparil suggests, it's finding that sweet spot in the middle perhaps, but moderation is certainly a route to go. This isn't a signal or a sign to start pouring on the salt, but it is a suggestion that we need to look more closely at what our guidelines are to make sure that they're in sync with what's healthy.
Okay, let's go back to Dr. Oparil. We keep hearing a lot of health studies, and they seem, to come out and say, low salt now, not too low salt. I mean, it's a bit confusing for people. How do people find that middle way of what is right? Maybe in a few more months we'll have another study that says, pile it on. You understand the confusion?
Yes, it would be very hard for lay people, and in fact there is a huge controversy in the biomedical community. Both public health people and epidemiologists and researchers are still looking for clues about what is the optimal salt intake, if you will. But one thing that we haven't talked about is what is you don't just eat salt or no salt, you eat a diet. And if you eat a diet that is nutritious in the sense that it's high in potassium, is in fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy products, that will counter the effects of high salt intake. Everybody agrees that if you eat huge amounts of salt, your blood pressure will increase, and that the increase in blood pressure by itself makes you somewhat more prone to develop heart disease. But by eating a healthy diet that is fresh foods as much as possible, and vegetables, fish, fruits, and avoiding fast food, as Ron said, that's really the way to go. It's not really practical, I think, to read food labels and count grams and milligrams. That's beyond most lay people's capability, even beyond my capability.
And you are no lay person. Well, it sounds like a balanced diet is the thing to go with. Thank you very much, Professor Suzanne Oparil of the University of Alabama, and thank you very much, Ron Winslow.